So we had a 75%, 3/4 of a point basis rate increase from the Fed. This is the fourth rate increase in a row at their meetings. It's the largest series I think we've ever had historically. Why does this matter? Well, they're saying they're trying to fight inflation, right? That's what the Fed says they do. They say they want to keep that at a targeted 2%. Now, if you follow traditional economics, the reason for inflation is generally tied to an increase in wages and nothing more, but that's actually not what's happening. Most of the increase in inflation is just absolute corporate greed and profiteering. They're taking a higher margin, profit margin, and wages are still suppressed because they haven't even kept up with the pace of inflation.
Well, and I just want to add, though, that type of economics, which is the general economics that you're taught in school, it follows a neoliberal playbook that has been debunked time and time again because it is absolute bullshit that has been failing this world for 40 years plus. And it leaves out so many freaking factors. Like it operates under this model that we're all just a bunch of widgets. And it's like, well, there's too many dollars now because the widgets have too much of it. That's not how the freaking world works. That's just not how the world works. And time again, that's been proven. And there's all kinds of MMT and other economic schools of thought that debunk all of this because they actually do the work at diving a little bit deeper and incorporating humanity into it.
Right. Part of it too, Ron, I think the biggest issue is that they look at the employment rate as their only gauge, right? They don't look at underemployment, right? So if their end goal is to have low unemployment and they get it to a certain level, they think it's fine if people can't make enough money apparently to pay for their bills. Yeah. Obviously, this isn't a correct gauge because at some point it's a disaster to have 50% of your population working in jobs that don't allow them to pay rent, buy food, and have a little bit of extra money left over for consumer spending because, again, our entire system is driven by consumption, right? So they need people to spend money in order for the economy to grow. So it's really a false idea to just look at employment in and of itself and not understand that a big chunk of that is just underemployment and people can't pay their bills.
Well, yeah, the way we measure employment is bullshit on its own. Like looking at just that is a bullshit thing to do.
Well, if you follow the rules, yeah, it's not accurate.
If you follow the rules, if you're discouraged and not looking, if you're underemployed, none of those are counted. And even what we just qualify as living, a lot of times, especially in the good old contemporary USA, it's not living, it's surviving and barely surviving. So it's a bullshit metric 6 ways to Sunday. And but let's see what they're saying.
Let's see what they're saying. I do have a clip of a video from Powell that Colin, if you can pull that up and play that.
We are taking forceful and rapid steps to moderate demand so that it comes into better alignment with supply. Our overarching focus is using our tools to bring inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keep longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Reducing inflation is likely to require a sustained period of below-trend growth, and there will very likely be some softening of labor market conditions. Restoring price stability is essential to set the stage for achieving maximum employment and stable prices over the longer run. We will keep at it until we're confident the job is done.
Now, mind you, I want to read it again. Nothing he says addresses the fact that a lot of these jobs don't pay enough, that the inflation is not being caused by wages. Wages are still suppressed because they haven't kept pace with inflation. So, which makes these two things a disaster. Now, adding to this, Ron, my bigger concern is the fact that credit card rates, especially if you have a variable credit card rate, those rates are tied to the Fed funds rate. So that means we're going to see another substantial increase probably in credit card interest rates, which means those that have been using those credit cards the last few years just to survive, just to get by, are now looking at a higher burden just by what the Fed did yesterday. So this could hit those that need the most help the hardest. So on that note, I wanted to bring up two competing articles. The first one is a CNN business article, and then I'm going to turn to an article from Robert Reich, who's the only one that seems to understand this relationship. So the CNN article, this one's addressing the relationship to credit cards. They do touch on some of the concerns that I have, so I give them credit for that. All right. So as prices continue to rise, Americans are becoming increasingly reliant on credit cards to make purchases. And now with the Federal Reserve's latest 0.75 percentage point hike, many of them will be paying more for the debt that they've been accumulating. Interest rates on nearly all credit cards and home equity lines of credit will increase after this latest rate hike, and borrowers with variable interest rates will notice the difference quickly, said Tad Rossman, senior industry analyst at Bankrate. It's pretty much right away within a statement cycle or two. Okay, this is the frightful part. At a little over 18%, the average APR new credit cards is within a percentage point of its all-time high of 19%, set in July of 1991, according to Rossman. The effect on existing credit card borrowers is probably actually worse, he said, because of the rate hikes the Fed has undertaken already this year. Chances are your credit card is already 2.25 percentage points higher than it was in March. That's right. We've had 4 consecutive rate hikes. So they're mounting. Despite the climbing rates, credit card debt is rapidly approaching the all-time record set in the fourth quarter of 2019, Rossman said. So this should also be a massive concern to these folks. The fact that the credit card debt overall has increased for the obvious reasons, and it's not just COVID. COVID's definitely part of it, right? People didn't have jobs. They were using their credit cards to get by to survive. But part of it is also the fact that we've had increases not only in consumer goods, food, but also rent. Rents are at an all-time high. And just things that you need to get by, gas, things of this nature. So when you can't make ends meet and you're living paycheck to paycheck, what do? You turn to your credit card and you use that. Well, if you're now seeing, credit card rates, the average is 19%. I've seen some as high as 27%, Ron, 27%. This is untenable. So if you've amassed debt over the last 3 or 4 years at a lower rate, thinking like, okay, I'll be able to make this payment, now all of a sudden you can't make the payment.
This is all a gross self-inflicted wound by society. This is all, I mean, you are taught like, oh, well, we can't pump money into the economy. We can't give higher wages because it'll cause inflation because people will have more money. That's not how it frickin' works. That's not how it works. That operates under this idea that we're all just brain dead widgets standing around. And when more money enters a society, which by the way is just created, that nothing happens. Nobody pays a bill. Nobody goes out and buys something. Nobody has an exchange of goods and services or an exchange of labor. That is exactly what happens. And there is no reason why anybody should be underemployed in this society. There's no reason why anybody should not be able to find a job if they want one and are able to do one. We have crumbling infrastructure. We have a collapsing climate. There is so much to be done, and we have the ability to do all of it. We have the ability to do all of it because the currency can just be created, and then we can use the resources to do what we need. There's no reason for it other than corporate greed, because they have to use this farce of scarcity so that
it's a false scarcity. Yeah,
so that people will just be obedient. They want it this way. It's benefiting a small handful of people, and it's all based on neoliberal economic bullshit. Read Stephanie Kelton, read Debt by David Graeber, that puts all this stuff to rest once and for all. There's no reason why we can't have an efficient federal jobs program. There's no reason why we can't have strong infrastructure. There's no reason why we can't start completely getting off fossil fuels. There's no reason why anybody who is able to work shouldn't be able to. And there's also no reason why anybody should go hungry in a country with the amount of wealth that this country has. There's no freaking reason for it. California was just declared the 4th largest GDP in the world. And they were celebrating this. Gavin Newsom was wetting himself. We're the 4th largest GDP in the world. And we still don't have an efficient train that goes from San Francisco to Los Angeles. We can't pull that off. 4th largest GDP in the world. And it also costs an arm and a leg and 2 legs to frickin' live here. So, man, what a bargain. What a frickin' bargain. We're the 4th largest GDP in the world. Who helps make that GDP possible? The people who frickin' live here.
And work.
And they have to pay out the ass to exist here. Yeah. What a freaking scam. And then you have people on the corporate media, these financial analysts, whatever they are, and they just peddle this absolute bullshit that nobody should take remotely serious because it's all just a bunch of fluff that can be pushed over like a feather. There's no reason for any of this. The whole idea of like the way we measure credit and stuff, that can just be traced back to what, like 1987? That's another load of bullshit that was just used to basically discriminate against people buying houses, usually black and brown people. So it's just a freaking scam. You are living, the United States is like if a parking ticket was a country. It's just a scam.
So, and of course the financial powers that be, the talking heads that work in business news, go on to say basically, well, now's the time to pay off your credit card debt, as if that's a possibility. For most people in this position, that's not possible. That's why they're in this position to begin with. So to just flippantly say, pay off the debt before it increases is kind of an ignorant stance.
It's always the regular person's fault somehow. Do you ever notice that? Do you ever notice in all these like little things? It's always our fault. It's always your fault. It's always my fault. It's always the person trying to go to college. It's their fault. It's never the fault of the powers that be. That either are this clueless or it's by design.
It's by design, Ron, because we were not always this way. We have been stepping in this direction for several decades. It was not always this way, right? There was a time when you could afford to go to college because the college system was still funded by, at least the public system was still funded by taxpayer dollars. There was a time where you made a decent wage relative to what rents cost. There was a time when we had more affordable housing and rent control laws. Like all of these things were given away, and you're correct, neoliberal pushes towards privatization. Arguments taken up by both sides of the aisle that the free market is the moral arbiter when that's simply not the case. I would also add one more thing to this. Part and parcel to this, to bring it up again, is the antitrust. The fact that the Department of Justice stopped enforcing antitrust laws have also led us in this direction, because there are fewer companies out there, right, offering more services in a competitive way. There's now a handful, and no matter what industry you're looking at, that control the resources, and that's never good for consumers. And it allows them to engage in the profiteering that we're seeing right now. It allows them to expand their profit margins, to take more in profit, and then to turn around and just have the Fed say, well, it's because everybody's getting a job, so we have to do something about increases in wages, when those increases just don't exist. It's a provable fact that this is profiteering. So on that note, I want to pull up a article from Robert Reich that was in The Guardian. He's going to give us I think, the more lucid argument as to what's happening here. So basically, he's saying corporations are using rising costs as an excuse to increase their prices even higher, resulting in record profits. We need limited price controls to break this cycle. So on Wednesday, policymakers at the Federal Reserve, America's central bank, continued their battle against inflation with a third straight supersized interest rate increase. And they warned that they're not done. They'll continue raising borrowing costs until inflation is tamed. They assume that the underlying economic problem is a tight labor market causing wages to rise and prices to rise in response. And they believe interest rate increases are necessary to slow this wage price inflation. This is dead wrong. Wage increases have not even kept up with inflation. Most workers' paychecks are shrinking in terms of real purchasing power. Rather than causing inflation, wages are actually reducing inflationary pressures. The underlying economic problem is profit price inflation. It's caused by corporations raising their prices above their increasing costs. Corporations corporations have the power to raise prices without losing customers because they face so little competition. Since the 1980s, 2/3 of all American industries have become more concentrated. Why are grocery prices through the roof? Because just 4 companies control 85% of meat and poultry processing.
And that's about to get worse, by the way.
Exactly. Just one corporation sets the price for most of the nation's seed corn, and 2 giant firms dominate consumer staples. Again, this is relating back to the antitrust laws, right? All are raising prices and increasing profits because they can. That's it. That's the reason right there, folks. It's because they can. It's completely disconnected from what Powell was saying in that video, is my point.
No, and this is definitely going in the better direction. I still think there's a lot more factors than just that. But I think like he's going in the right direction, that, yeah, it's just corporate greed. They're raising the prices because they can. And also, I think there's another component going on here. Look,
Yeah.
people at Starbucks, they're striking. They're trying to form unions. People at Amazon, they're working on forming unions. They're striking. We're going to talk about a story coming up here in California that might be the biggest strike in 2022. That's coming up here in a minute or two. So the powers that be don't like that. So they're like, oh, that's why prices are so high. It's because people are striking. They're trying to sell you that bullshit.
It's
bullshit.
It's just that. Don't buy it. Don't buy it.
Look at their profit margins. They're making record profits. The oil companies are making record profits right now. What they do is they take disasters in society or war or whatever it is, and they use it to justify jacking up their prices to screw over everybody. And like even that article points out, they don't have any competition, so they're doing just fine. So then their profit margins are through the roof, and they try to sell the idea to you that the reason for the high prices are because of workers. It's a lie.
It's a lie. And I think
it's always been a lie. It's always been a scam. And it's just coming to a head.